everyone, and thanks for attending our first ever Chalkbeat Philadelphia event. My name's Carrie Malago, and I'm a managing editor for local news at Chalkbeat. As a Pennsylvania native, I'm thrilled to work with this new bureau and excited for the great journalism our staff plans to bring in the coming year. As you may know, Chalkbeat partnered with the Philadelphia Public School Notebook back in August to open this bureau. We at Chalkbeat are excited to build on the Notebook's 25-year history of having a profound impact on the students, parents, teachers, and administrators in Philadelphia. Impact is truly at the core of what Chalkbeat works toward throughout our communities, with reporting that equips readers with the information they need to make informed decisions, and in some cases, take informed action. We're lucky that the Notebook's Dale Mezzacappa, a legend in education reporting in Philly journalism circles, came on board as our senior reporter. And we're also thrilled to have as our bureau chief, Johann Calhoun, a longtime journalist who served 15 years as an editor at the Philadelphia Tribune. So far, they've accomplished a lot in a short period of time. Dale wrote about how the country's racial reckoning could impact diversity in Philly's elite schools. They also analyzed the district's ventilation reports to find that only a third of elementary schools met minimum standards. And of course, they've chronicled every twist and turn in Philly's school reopening plans. Like the Notebook, Chalkbeat is a nonprofit news organization committed to covering the effort to improve schools for all children. In November 2018, Chalkbeat launched our very own membership program. In the 2 years since, we've built a community of over 1,000 members across our 8 bureaus. I know we have a few local Philadelphia members here tonight, so I wanted to personally thank them for their ongoing support. We're currently in our end of year campaign, where news match in 2 local organizations, the Wyncote Foundation and Independence Public Media Foundation, are matching donations made on or before December 31st. That means every donation will be tripled. If you'd like to support our work and become a Chalkbeat member, please consider making a donation via the link available now in the chat. And now I'd like to hand it off to Caroline Baumann, Chalkbeat's Community Engagement Strategist.
Hi, everyone. We're so thrilled you're joining us today. I'm going to introduce our really just rock star panel and then also do a couple notes of housekeeping. So we're thrilled today to be joined by Ace Orion, a sophomore at Franklin Learning Center High School and reporter for The Flash. We're also joined, of course, by our Chalkbeat Philadelphia folks, Johann Calhoun, our bureau chief and a longtime resident of West Philadelphia, also the former city editor at the Philadelphia Tribune, and Dale Mezzacappa, Chalkbeat Philadelphia senior reporter, who is not a stranger to many of you joining us. She's the Notebook's longtime contributing editor and has a long history in Philadelphia education journalism between her time at the Notebook and the Philadelphia Inquirer. And then also thrilled to be joined by Jordan Williams, a senior at Carver Engineering and Science High School and reporter for the Carver Times. So a couple notes of housekeeping and then we'll get started. Thank you all again for joining. It's hard in these digital spaces that we find ourselves in to feel connected, but we think that these virtual events are a way to get to know one another and hear from one another. I'd love to just get a sense of who's in the room. So I just launched a quick Zoom poll that everyone can participate in. Take a moment to fill that out and then I'll share the results. Helps us feel a little bit more like we can know who's joining us. So we appreciate you for doing that. So a couple quick things about a Zoom and then we'll launch in. You should see a Q&A box on the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Please use that to submit audience questions. We'll have a time at the end to hear your questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time today. It's going to be a quick hour to hear from our event attendees directly. But you can use the chat box if there's any technical issue that arises, or you can use it as the amen corner, right? If somebody says something that you agree with or want to build off of, please use the chat box for that. This event is being recorded and broadcasted. It's on Facebook Live right now. And we'll send around a recording of it afterward via email to everyone who signed up on Eventbrite. So we'll be able to share it with others who can't join us tonight. So just want to share the results really quick. Got some students in the room, which is so exciting. Lots of educators, parents, school leaders, community members, and journalists. All facets are represented, so that's awesome. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our Philadelphia Bureau Chief, Johann, who's going to kick us off, he and Dale, with a quick scene setter, some quick words.
Hi, everyone. I'm Johann Calhoun, the Bureau Chief for Chalkbeat Philadelphia. Even though I'm a native of Houston, Texas, I've lived in Philadelphia longer. Next year, we'll make it 22 years. Most people, of course, like Caroline and Carrie said, know me from the Philadelphia Tribune, where I worked for 15 years. And 7 of those years, I was city editor. I also spent time at the Bucks County Courier-Times and supervised the Camden County beat for the Courier Post in South Jersey. My upbringing and advocacy work are reasons why I'm dedicated to education journalism. I come from a family of educators. My late mother was a high school biology teacher in Houston. My grandmother, who graduated from Jackson State and Vanderbilt, was a counselor for the Mississippi School for the Blind. And my grandfather, who graduated from Alcorn State and Tuskegee, became one of the first Black principals in Jackson, Mississippi. And if you are familiar with those names, with the exception of Vanderbilt, they're all HBCUs. So in that, I fully understand the value and importance of these institutions. As a resident of West Philadelphia, I've witnessed firsthand how the classroom climate for our students has evolved, and I'm well aware of the stark differences in the region's academic offerings. So with that energy, I'm glad to be here today with the students and my colleagues, specifically Dale Mezzacappa at Chalkbeat. So Dale, you got it.
Hi, everyone, and I want to thank everybody for coming. So I came to Philadelphia in the mid-1980s. I was working for the Philadelphia Inquirer. I started my journalism career at a daily newspaper after graduating from college and I worked for the Bergen Record, which is now the Record in Northern New Jersey. I was hired by the Inquirer, but I spent the early part of my career covering politics and government in New Jersey, moved to the Washington Bureau to cover, during the Reagan administration, actually, to write about, to cover the New Jersey delegation and occasionally Joe Biden in Delaware. I came back to Philadelphia. When I came back in the mid-80s, I had a young son, and I decided that I wanted to write more about children and families, and the education beat came open and they offered it to me and I took it. And I didn't realize at the time that I would be covering education for that long, but I think it has evolved as a beat from something that was sort of considered a starter beat at major news organizations to a destination beat and a very important beat to cover, and a prestige beat. During that period, I joined the Education Writers Association, was the president of it for a few years. I left the Inquirer in 2006 when it started going through its ownership changes and joined the Notebook a few years later, and then stayed on with Chalkbeat when that merger occurred. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming.
Thanks so much, Dale. So I'm incredibly excited about this event because we're joined by Ace and Jordan, who are students, but also reporters. And so I'd love to kick off our time together by handing the moderator reins over to Jordan and Ace, who have some questions for Dale and Johann. So Jordan, why don't you kick us off with the question?
So hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jordan, and I'm a senior at George Washington Carver High School of Engineering and Science. So my question today for the journalists here are, during a time like this when writers are all talking about the same topic or issue, how do you set yourself apart and make your article more interesting?
Well, the aim first is to provide objective reporting, but also be empathetic and understanding, because no one last year would have guessed any of us would be dealing with this pandemic. Yet in the same, hold leaders who are charged with managing the situation, hold them accountable, and that they are making the right decisions for our students. Also, the Philly education scene is unique in that it has seen a shift from state control to now being city control, with the city and the district facing huge budget deficits, and the mayor playing a huge part now in how education here is governed. So in telling these stories, readers of Chalkbeat Philadelphia will see a mix in how we present these stories to the public. You may see an analysis at times, you may see a first person piece where a parent or teacher is giving an inside look at how they are dealing with the pandemic, and also a feature or two called How I Teach, where city teachers describe their day teaching our students.
Thanks so much, Johann. Ace, I also want to throw it over to you. I believe you have a question for Dale.
Hi everyone, I'm Ace, a sophomore at Franklin Learning Center High School, and my question for Dale is, what drove you personally to report on education?
Well, I sort of said that a little bit already. As you know, when you're a journalist, you're supposed to be able to do everything. You know, one of the great benefits of being a journalist is that it's a constant education. You're always learning about something. You may be asked to cover a story about something that you really don't know anything about, and you have to learn about it sometimes in a day so that you can report on it and be accurate and help the readers understand it. I loved political reporting. I still love political reporting, but I was a single mom of a child, and I was given the opportunity to write about education, and I took it because I think that there's nothing more important in terms of building the country and helping develop who we are as a people than a good school system. When I started covering the schools, that's sort of not the attitude I went in with exactly, but I've come to understand that in more than 30 years of doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Dale, something I think that's really special is you've, as you said, really been able to see the beat grow and flourish in many ways. And so I'm, kind of hopeful that Ace and Jordan are future Chalkbeat education reporters, but we'll see how that goes. So now I'm going to flip the script a little bit and be our moderator for our four amazing panelists. And my first question, I'd love to start with Ace and Jordan. As students, what are you all missing most about in-person learning? And what do you think could be done to improve virtual learning for you right now? So Jordan, how about we start with you for this question?
One thing that I can definitely say I miss most about in-person learning is the connections you make with your teachers. For me, being a senior, I'm fortunate to know all of my teachers already and have established that relationship. But I know for some freshmen, it is very important to know your teacher and establish that relationship. And it's really hard to get to learn somebody off Zoom. So that's something I really miss. And something that can improve it is just having time outside of class to talk to teachers and other students you normally wouldn't talk to. So I definitely miss like classroom debates with students about topics that we may disagree on. It definitely not only helped further my education, but challenged the way I think. So that's something I really miss about in-person learning.
And is there anything that comes to mind that your school could do to foster some of that connectivity to help folks get to know each other better right now?
We definitely try to have a lot of activities and programs, but it's kind of hard to push a program to students if they can't physically be there, like with the BSU at my school. So it's a new program and we're trying to get people to join, but it's kind of hard to make that connection as well on Zoom. So just promoting it to them on social media sites and just asking people to tell a friend and things of that. So having programs and stuff that's not always so related to classroom assignments would definitely help make that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jordan. Ace, what comes to mind for you for this question? What do you miss about in-person learning, and what could be done to improve virtual learning right now?
As much as I miss the connections with teachers, I also miss student connections. Like, I was really excited to meet the incoming freshmen this year, which was something I wanted to because I know how they feel like this is a new environment. And as a sophomore, it's like a moral responsibility to guide a freshman through it. But I also miss classroom discussions and debates and just conversations with teachers outside of the classroom. In a way, I think we can improve on this virtual setting is a lot more events with students and staff, outside of a class or a club, how we used to have in-person dances, but we used to do contests around our building. We do something similar, but in the virtual setting, we decorate a room in the house or our workspace.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ace. I appreciate it. And I also just want to say, shout out to the audience members who are submitting great questions. We'll definitely have a time at the end, so keep them coming, please. This next question is for all four of you as journalists. And it's, what's a story that you've reported on recently that helps illustrate what Philadelphia students' lives are like right now, especially how students are doing socially and emotionally? So what's a story that you've reported on recently that helps illustrate? Johann, I'd love to start with you for this.
Sure. That's a good question. The best story that sticks out right now has to be the piece that I did on support for LGBTQ students. The level of reporting for that piece offered layers in describing some of the struggles the student population is going through right now in losing after-school support, finding a safe space that's not home, places to go to get a warm meal, how those challenges can affect their studies. We also delved into the school district policy known as Policy 252, which is aimed at protecting these students from discrimination, as well as highlighting a recent state Supreme Court case, which involved a gay student who was bullied and later raped by his classmates. I'm going to quickly also give you another one. I know you asked us for one, but I think that story and the piece I did on internet trauma, I believe that was my first piece for Chalkbeat, detailed how students are forced to sit at their screens. You know, you guys are sitting at the screens all day, and at times you're watching violent and graphic scenarios, especially what's happening with police brutality incidents, and no one there really to help you guys discuss and understand what you are seeing.
Yeah, thank you. Two really, really important stories that are available at Chalkbeat. Jordan, I'd love to throw this to you. What's a story you've been working on recently that you think really stands and helps represent what's going on right now?
I did a personal story about a freshman that started at Carver. Her name's Amy Pam. And we talked on the phone a lot about my freshman year and how it was very important to me and how it shaped me socially and figuring out, what friend group I belonged in or who I should and should not be hanging out with. So I just asked her in a virtual space, how is she finding new friends? How are they communicating with each other during this time? And has she made any friends so far this year? She was very open and honest with me that, she feels that she is making some friends. But she was very adamant saying that she talked to students she normally wouldn't have talked to otherwise. So I think not only has this been a give and a take, some people are looking at the brighter side of things. So I'm happy that she was like, I'm talking to people that I probably wouldn't have walked up to in school. So it's definitely a give and a take to what's going on right now. So that was the story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Dale, how about you? What's a story that comes to mind?
Well, I could also cite two stories. One story was a story that I wrote about the fact that 8th graders have to decide what high school to go to. And that's usually a process in which they're, they have their counselors in school with them, and their counselors help them, and they can go visit the schools they want to attend. But of course, now that is all off the table. So they have to make this huge decision about their future without being able to visit schools. And in some cases, the counselors getting together with their counselors to make the decisions and help them discern what the right choices might be for them is just so much harder to do in this virtual, far away environment. And the other story that I would cite is the story that I wrote about a teacher, Steve Fleming, who, when Jordan was talking about, and Ace were talking about relationships and how important they are with their teachers and how they miss that, he was saying that he teaches in Martin Luther King High School, and he was saying that he doesn't even know what some of his kids look like. And basically that's because most students don't turn their cameras on. And for reasons that we talked about a little bit before, about issues that Johann mentioned about privacy and their home lives and so forth. And by not forcing them to turn their cameras on, which some teachers do apparently, he felt that that was a way that they knew that he really cared about them. So that paradox really struck me as, it was stunning, really, to think that, he said, I could walk past one of my students on the street and I wouldn't know who they were, but yet he feels like he's able to some extent to form a relationship with them by respecting them in that way. But it's kind of sad too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Ace, I'd love to end with you on this question.
The piece that I've done this year is also centered around the freshmen and their use of the internet chatting service Discord, which is a lot like a place where you can talk to people much like any other texting app, and their use of it to connect with each other. It's similar, like Jordan said, like they are talking to people they wouldn't normally walk up and talk to. And it's caused them to connect a lot better based on the students I've talked to.
Yeah. Which is fascinating because you'd kind of assume the opposite would be true to some extent, but that's what I love about your reporting, Ace and Jordan, is it shows that there are other sides. There's not just one tone, right? Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Ace, for sharing. Dale, I'd love to go back to you. So school reopening plans continue to change in Philadelphia. One of you should correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't today supposed to be one of the days in the original plans of, back to Ace's nodding, today was supposed to be one of the days when students could return to in-person, some students could return to in-person classes. And of course, the plan has changed a billion times over since then. So Dale, Philadelphia school buildings on average are 70 years old, and millions of dollars has been spent to improve ventilation systems during the pandemic. You've reported on these issues extensively. From your perspective as a journalist, do you think it's likely school buildings could reopen this school year? And what do you think are the most important unanswered questions that you're thinking about?
Wow, I don't know that I am really an expert on that, but or making predictions is really useful in this rapidly changing environment. The story I just finished writing, which I don't even think is up on the site yet, is about how the University of Pennsylvania announced today that it was donating $100 million to the school district over 10 years to help specifically with asbestos abatement and other hazard cleanup at these very ancient school buildings, as you said, average age 70 years old. What I learned in writing about the ventilation systems is that for most schools, the ventilation are the windows, I mean, they do have they do have a ventilation system of some sort, depending on the age of the building and the rooms and everything. But the issue of how you measure if there's enough fresh air in a room, a lot of the schools really aren't equipped with the most modern ways of making sure that that ventilation is adequate. And the other thing I learned was that the ventilation that most schools are being judged by is just simple ventilation standards to make sure that, you know, that that there's no, you know, odors or, you know, that it just is that the air seems okay, not to mitigate virus transmission. That's a much higher standard that most ordinary school buildings, most homes for sure do not have. So I think that there's a lot of distrust also among school teachers, groups of teachers relating to, are these buildings safe? And one of the reasons why Penn donated the money was the realization that it's such an enormous task to try to get these old buildings to be safe in normal conditions, much less pandemic conditions. So, you know, what has been said all along about when schools reopen, originally it was going to reopen, they were going to reopen in a hybrid model at the beginning of the school year. There was a lot of pushback against that and protest. That plan was changed to mid to late November. And this was a day, I think, when teachers, or yesterday maybe it was, when teachers were supposed to return and then the students were going to return on the 30th of November. That's all been pushed back again, mostly due to the surge in cases in Philadelphia. Interestingly enough, both Dr. Farley, who is the health commissioner, and the superintendent and the mayor to some degree have all been trying to stressing the importance of schools and the need to keep schools open because of the benefit and value they have to child development and the danger of children falling behind and the ultimate effect on them. New York City, for instance, has kept some schools open, at least a hybrid fashion, while closing other things. Some of the suburban school districts around here have open schools. Philadelphia has not. You know, how things will develop both in the case of the course of the virus and in the kind of the public pressure and whether people feel the buildings themselves are safe to return to in a pandemic situation when you still have to be careful about transmission. Right. I think it's chancy that schools will open in person. The next plan is to try to go for January. And just on Friday, there was a protest by some teachers saying that not even January is going to be safe enough, you know, given all the conditions that are being faced. So I really can't say, but I think there is a chance that we might not see in-person school for the rest of the school year. Yeah, I think it's a really good plug to stay informed, right, through these student publications that we've talked about and through Chalkbeat. Yeah, thank you, Dale. I think the only certain thing is uncertainty these days, but we know unfortunately that's the world we're in right now. We know that our journalists are working hard to stay on top of it. Ace, I'd love to ask you, as just from a personal standpoint, what would make you personally feel comfortable returning to school buildings? And do you feel like you and your fellow students are being kept in the know, being looped in as things change and progress?
What I think would be a safer alternative is, yes, use the hybrid method, but I also watched the video of the reopening plan and the conditions and the precautions they're taking for cleaning and making sure the building is safe for the next group to attend. But with the ventilation systems and how we have found out most of them aren't clean, that is easy for disease spread. So the first step would be to clean the vents and make sure everything is up to date. And of course, enforce mask wearing and have students socially distance, but we can't really do that in a classroom that was designed for 30 desks, where each desk is like 2 feet apart. So what I guess I would be saying is, yes, use the hybrid method. Yes, enforce everything that the school district wants to do, but do not reopen a building when the conditions aren't met to date that also puts students at a health risk. And make sure that students are going to abide by the precautions taken. I'm drawing.
Yeah. Well, it's a hard question. But no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing. Jordan, I'd love to switch to you and switch the topic a little bit. So you're a senior, congratulations. It's very exciting. And as a senior, do you feel like you have different needs this year as you plan for post-high school, given the world that we live in? And what is one or two things that your school could do to better help you navigate your senior year as you think about what happens next?
Well, my school already has this. We have a senior STEM class that all seniors take that helps you apply to colleges and for FAFSA and SIA and things like that. So definitely for other high schools, I definitely think that's a class that should be had. So already most of my colleagues and classmates have already applied early action to at least one university or applied to TCP. So ENS definitely keeps us very organized and on top of our stuff in the college route. But something that I think that my school could do is definitely have like adulting 101, which is like, how is everything going to work now that we're in this new space? Which is, I know, an unrealistic question, but just something as we're like applying to colleges, asking like, now a question that you have to ask is, well, do you think I'll be on campus? Or do you think this is going to be something where I'm going to be at home? So definitely the dialogue is different because obviously I want to live on campus, but is that the safest and the best financial situation for me? Because am I going to be on campus in my dorm room, or am I going to be on campus living like all other college students did? So just things that we have to think about now that is different from before COVID. So
yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Ace, I also want to kind of come back to you, thinking specifically about how to stay motivated in a virtual world, which is a very difficult thing to do. Kudos to the people who are hanging with us during this conversation, because it's just hard to stay engaged. Ace, how have you thought through how to stay motivated in your classes in a virtual world? What are some of the kind of tools and tips you and your peers have figured out to keep yourself on track?
It's a lot of trying to keep ourselves accountable for our work. So like we'll look at a due date of an assignment, or like we'll try and get it done this week, but like if that doesn't work out, we'll hold ourselves accountable and try to work on it the best we can. And it's a lot of talking to each other and helping each other out with an assignment and keeping morale up between everyone, like reaching out to one another if one of us is feeling down and trying to push us through, like especially in like a breakout room when it's like probably someone you know is in your grade but you haven't met, but then it's someone else who knows that person and knows you, and try to bridge the gap there. And it's really just a lot of talking to each other and planning. That's about it.
Yeah. And when you guys talk to each other, what are you using to do that? What does it look like?
We're usually using like Instagram or Discord or Snapchat, like just trying to keep each other in the know of what we're all doing, and then what everyone is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a full community effort, a full team effort. That's great. Cool, thanks for sharing. So I want to hit on another theme before we start diving into some audience questions, because we have a lot and they're really good. Another plug to submit your questions, because we're going to be getting to them soon. So Chalkbeat recently reported that some educators and community activists are arguing that Black Lives Matter curriculum should be a part of remote learning for the district. Their call was reinforced after days of protest in West Philadelphia following the fatal police shooting of Walter Wallace Jr. So Johann, I want to start with you because you wrote that story for Chalkbeat and have been following this. What did educators tell you about teaching students about Black Lives Matter virtually? What did you hear from educators when you were doing that story?
Yeah, I spoke with a wide range of teachers and educators and community activists about that. And the Black Lives Matter in schools, that movement happened well before Walter Wallace, well before that shooting in Cobb's Creek. So to provide the audience with some context, Black Lives Matter in schools, that movement began when thousands of educators in Seattle came to school in 2016, I forget the month, wearing shirts that said Black Lives Matter to promote racial equity in schools. And that is where things kind of popped off. And it's important to know that the school district in Seattle is predominantly white, which means these concerns have transcended well past race and ethnicity. So the Philadelphia effort initially started with the Day of Solidarity with the teachers in Seattle. And the following year, a group of teachers within the PFT, they pressed schools and teachers here to commit 1 hour a day to teaching students about Black Lives Matter through lesson plans and events for students. And that same year, the district created a Black Lives Matter week in the last week of January and gave teachers the option to teach the material to students. So fast forward to 2020, we have this issue with racial reckoning, and we have seen so many acts of unrest in Philadelphia. First, earlier this year, with George Floyd out of Minneapolis, and then of course Walter Wallace with the unrest that happened in West Philadelphia. Matter of fact, it happened 4 blocks from my house, and I attended many rallies and many protests, many student rallies at Malcolm X Park that focused specifically on this. So these teachers have to sit in class and try to help students who are coming to school confused, sad, angry, disappointed, and filled with so many questions, and with many of them only to be answered after school hours. So organizers of the Philadelphia movement, they have always thought that throughout these years from 2016 to 2020, that the amount of Black Lives Matter curriculum that was taught pre-pandemic was not enough, especially with the racial reckoning sharing center stage with the pandemic, and of course, ultimately with the presidential election. They also advise teachers to make their remote classrooms a safe learning space filled with empathy and understanding on why Black and brown people are being killed. Many of these students are seeing people killed who look just like them, and they have questions about that. The teachers also say it's important to teach Black Lives Matter in school because so many non-Black people may not understand the direction, or not the direction, the direct connection that these incidents like the Walter Wallace case may have to their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Johann. It's a really amazing story. We'll re-up it, or it's recently posted on our Chalkbeat Philadelphia Facebook page. So I encourage you all to read it. Jordan, I'd love to kind of build with you along this topic. So you mentioned this at the beginning, that you're a part of your school's new Black Student Union, or BSU. So tell us about the work you've been up to with the Black Student Union and why it's important given the current environment and discord we find ourselves in.
So over the summer is when we decided to start a Carver Black Student Union. Everything we were witnessing in the media, teachers and students all got together on multiple Zoom calls and decided that we needed to do something needed to change. So stuff we've been working on since then, we registered a bunch of my senior class to vote, so they got to participate in this election. We've been having Zoom meetings and panels about enforcing African American history, not only in that elective that we take our sophomore year as Philly students, but in science class, math class, and just other history courses that we take. Our big thing is expanding the knowledge and advocacy of students, so that knowing that even though you see this problem, we actively seek to solve all problems we identify. So just students being able to say that we are old enough to make a change, and we don't have to wait to do so. So yeah, definitely just talking to each other, creating that safe space where we can come together no matter our differences, and really just talk to each other and be there for one another during a time like this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how, even though we're talking about a lot of different themes, we keep coming back to this need for spaces for students and educators to express themselves honestly, to have meaningful conversations with each other. And I also think it's special because journalism provides this similar space in many ways of trying to tell stories that are deep and complex and meaningful. And so thank you, Jordan. I'm really excited to keep learning about the work you're doing with the BSU and the spaces y'all are able to create. So I want to switch to audience questions. We have a lot of really good ones and we'll do our best to get through some of them. So I love this question from Christina, and I'd like to ask it to Dale. Can you tell a story about a time you got into quote unquote good trouble in your work as a journalist, thinking about how it's important to report on deep issues in these times? So Dale, when did you get yourself into some good trouble? What comes to mind?
That's an interesting question. Meaning that I sort of wrote about something that kind of caused a stir in a sense.
When did you piss people off, Dale, for the good of the cause?
When did I? Well, I don't know whether, that's the right way to put it. I got threatened with a lawsuit once. Never happened, but it was a story which I still think about a lot, which is a story I wrote back, 30 years ago now, about sexual misconduct at Mastermind. It was a music teacher who was actually having inappropriate relationships with students. And this was before Me Too, or when this kind of thing was talked about very much. It was also when statutes of limitations, which are still pretty short for that kind of thing, were very short. And in the kind of abuse that was occurring, the young women didn't really come to terms with it until quite a few years later. So that story comes to mind as one that certainly caused a stir when it appeared.
Yeah.
But I think it did. By the time the story ran, it ran in the late lamented Inquirer Sunday magazine, which hasn't existed now for quite a while. But by the time the story actually ran, he had been relieved of his license and left town. But it it did have some degree of impact in bringing to light an issue that, as we know, since then has become more and more, unfortunately, in the public eye.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a cliche, the journalism verbiage around shining light, in the darkest places of our society, but it's also very much so our job, and a cliche because it's true. Uh, Johann, did you also want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I recall my days as a student journalist. This was in college. I was the editor of the campus publication at Southern University in Baton Rouge. And there was an issue with our yearbooks. The student body had not received yearbooks for some time. I think about 3 or 4 semesters had gone by. So I sat down with my news editor, Janelle Burrell, who is now Janelle Davis. She's an education reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC. And we sat down and we thought, how can we get this story out there, and how can we get people to pick up this paper and, shine a light on our yearbooks? So what we did, we went to the controller's office, and we were able to get a breakdown of the tuition. And sure enough, there was a breakdown on how much students were paying for their yearbooks. So we put together a story, a nice graphic every semester, how much was taken out of our tuition. The yearbook said, still no yearbooks. And the total amount came to $250,000. Can you believe that? $250,000 was missing from the school over the course of like four or five semesters. So after that story broke, one of the vice presidents of the school, he was terminated. The school had to go through an audit. I was threatened many times by the administration that I was going to lose my job and I was going to get kicked out of school. But the end result is, I can look back, and every year that I go back for homecoming is that people thank the staff for them having yearbooks.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, so the whole thing, the driving force behind journalism, whether you're a professional or a student, is accountability and, being a public servant for your audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Ace and Jordan, as student journalists, we have a great question from Dina, who's here with us. So given that you've been writing articles for your school newspaper, how has this made you understand the news that we see and read better? How has being a journalist given you a better sense of what journalism is? And does it help you to determine, especially during this period of time, what is real news and what is actually factual versus news from a site that is not factual or accurate? So basically, how has being a journalist helped influence your understanding of the way journalism works and the way to determine what is high quality journalism versus not? So Jordan or Ace, either of you want to weigh in on this?
Sure, I can go. For me, it's definitely made me not just read one article of anything or read just something I found on Instagram. So even if I read that one source I find, I look up the same theme or the same title and see if I can get it from another perspective. So it's definitely made me a better writer of finding different angles I could tell the story at. So perception is everything. So now when I write, it's like, I don't want to just tell it from this one person's perspective. Let's get as many different angles and sides to the story. So it's more of a holistic approach. So definitely me reading more and not trusting everything I read after I read it.
Yeah, absolutely. Ace, is there anything you want to add to this question?
It really has been an eye-opener for different types of news. Like, I'll read one thing and then I'll read something under the same topic, and there could be a lot of different information that's presented. Like, when you're talking about a big news outlet that should have all the facts and not that everything should be similar, but everything should be similar when it comes to fact and the entire story that's happening. It's really opened the eyes of what is being reported and what is being kept away and out of camera and journalist view. and what can and is being repressed from being reported on.
Yeah. Multiple sources. So important. That's great. Thank you both for sharing. Another question, Johann, I'd love for you to tackle this. From our audience, have you been able to learn about what is happening within the schools and classrooms during this virtual time? How has Chalkbeat Philadelphia been able to show what's happening inside classrooms, even when we can't physically, there are no physical classrooms to go to? What does that look like? I think you're muted. There you go.
I'll mute myself. Well, since March, students in Philadelphia have been hit hard with these obstacles, thanks to this pandemic that has altered the face of their classrooms. Safely reopening schools and connecting with students about the unrest happening around the killings of Black Americans, like we just talked, have become two of the biggest challenges for students here. Of course, the three subjects we are watching or have watched and will continue to watch are the students, the teachers, and the district, especially the leadership. And we have covered this remotely because of the pandemic. I know my former employer, they are clocking into work, but unlike other media outlets, are working remotely. So we're kind of parallel with the students because we're working from home, just like the students are working from home. But like I said, safely reopening schools and connecting with students about the unrest that's happening. And, during a time when social injustice has become a major point of concern, the emotional support of in-person learning is missed by a student body that is largely Black and Latino. We have to report on that and report on the way in which we are there. For many of our kids, the loss of guidance and hugs from teachers will continue to have a significant effect on their learning growth. And aside from the students, those struggling the most with remote learning are Philadelphia teachers. The stress of students not logged into class and skepticism of the district's safety plans are concerns for specifically the teachers union by way of Jerry Jordan.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. Okay, so I've got two more questions and then we're going to wrap up. So audience members, if you want to share a note of thanks to our amazing panelists in the chat as we get ready to wind down, you're more than welcome to. So a super nice comment from Lynn. I'm blown away by the great look and content of both the Flash and the Carver Times. Given the distractions these days and the challenges of reaching people online, I'm wondering how Jordan and Ace approach the question of how to get their stories read. What works best in terms of engaging their audiences? So either Ace or Jordan, y'all want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I could start us off. Definitely sharing it on social media definitely helps. Sending it out to my friends so they can repost it, and if they read it and like it, then they'll share it to their friends essentially. But specifically in my writing, I always try to find a way to connect it back to a bigger picture or connect it back to why should I care or why should you? So definitely making it so like the reader feels invested in what happens next, or giving them something to look forward to in the end, like a kicker quote, my teacher calls it, just something for them to hold on to, like a theme that you read in a story or like a bigger picture. So definitely adding something like that could help more people want to read your story or be more interested in what you're talking about.
Yeah, I love that. I hear my old editor's voice in my head saying, "Where's your nut graph, Caroline? How are you tying this to the bigger picture? How, why should people care? Why should people read this?" That's great. Ace, how do you think about how to engage your audience, which happens to be your fellow students, and get them to read your work?
Like Jordan said, it's a lot of social media promotion and sending it out to people who do have an interest in the subject and like, hey, you should read this if you want to find out more on your subject. And it's a lot of finding the writing that will get people interested, like your hook sentence and how it will tie to how does it affect you personally as a student or a teacher or a citizen of Philadelphia, or really just a general citizen of the US, really, and how your writing will keep people coming back for more.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Ace. Ace and Jordan, thank you both so much. So one of the reasons why I think this event is really special is because it puts us all in the same playing field. You both are journalists and professionals, and we really value your work. So thank you for joining us. I want to end with a final question for Johann and Dale before turning it over to my colleague Lee, who's going to wrap us up. Johann and Dale, there's a lot of things competing for our time right now, and there's a lot of news that feels really overwhelming. What is one specific topic that Chalkbeat Philadelphia is going to be following really closely that our audience listening in should know about and should know to keep coming back to Chalkbeat Philadelphia for? So in the midst of all the chaos, what are you committing to following, and why should we stick with you?
Well, right now, the district has over 7,000 homeless students. I interviewed Colleen Landy, who is the Assistant Director for Education for Children and Youth experiencing homelessness. It's getting cold outside, and there's a huge concern about their safety and well-being with the rise of COVID cases in the city and their ability to log in and be on pace with their fellow students. So that's one story that's the next feature story that I'm actually working on. But there are some other news education pieces that we should also be on the lookout for. Learning retention. A major worry for teachers and parents is learning loss. Whenever the students get back to their school buildings, the hurdle here is to make sure that students stay on track academically as they learn in an untraditional classroom setting that may not work for every student. You also have this issue with the board vacancies right now. Mayor Jim Kenney is in the process of filling 3 board seats. And he's been criticized in the past, specifically in 2018, when the city regained control of the school district, for not being transparent in the process of choosing who was going to sit on the board. And last but not least, of all the story topics is, of course, what's happening down in DC and getting help on the federal level, with Trump and Betsy DeVos leaving. Education leaders in Philadelphia are optimistic and somewhat hopeful, especially Philadelphia's responsibility in getting Biden into office. They're hopeful of change and direction, specifically with policies from the Biden administration. So I think I gave you more than what you wanted.
Always, Johann, but that's a good thing. Dale, anything you want to add?
Well, Johann covered a lot of them. I mean, I think I was going to say, how the Biden, the entirety of Chalkbeat, not just Philly, is covering, how the change in administration is going to affect schools and aid to schools. Obviously, we will continue to follow the progress in trying to make school buildings safe. And the issue that I've been trying to get as much information around as possible is the whole issue of internet connectivity. And it's not just homeless kids, there's a lot of kids who don't have the bandwidth, so to speak, literally, to do their schooling in this situation. Mm-hmm. When it has to be remote, and also the ultimate impact of remote learning on kids, and especially, it affects all of them, but the youngest children who are learning to read, and the oldest ones, the kids are going to graduate, and they're spending their final year of school in front of a computer and not with their friends, and those are all issues that we'd like to write more about.
Absolutely. Well, stick with us, folks. Stick with the amazing papers at Franklin and Carver. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it over really quickly to Lee Wack, who is our Senior Development Director, who's going to close us out.
Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to our students and our editorial team. This was a fantastic discussion. Please follow us on Twitter at Chalkbeat PHL. Please, subscribe to our e-newsletter on our website. And also, if you could just stay engaged with us. And as Carrie mentioned as we began, if you're able to support us in the work that we're doing, you can go to our website and click donate. It's really important that we're able to do this work and hear these student voices and lift up the very critical information at this very critical time. So again, thank you for participating. Please share this conversation, and we look forward to future events from Chalkbeat Philadelphia and continuing to be engaged with our students. So again, we're very thankful that all of you were here today.
Yep, thanks so much, everyone. You'll also get a notification for a survey as you exit. Spend a few moments on it. It really helps us with our events. Everyone go have some good dinner, and thank you so much.